For 11 years, Nereid had lived beneath the ocean. This morning, the ocean was leaving. The city stood on Pelagos, a low-gravity moon circling a gas giant so large it filled a third of the sky. Oksana Levchenko had lived here for 4 years. She had never seen her own street under open air. The water had been falling for 19 hours, slow enough to spare the city, fast enough to transform it before breakfast ended. Public systems were already redirecting the runoff before it reached the lower districts. At first, only the highest towers emerged. Their pressure skins shed sheets of seawater into streets that had never needed drains. Nereid was not a drowned ruin. It had been designed to spend almost its entire life underwater. The unusual part was not submersion. It was temporary exposure. Homes, transit lines, plazas, and public halls all assumed that an ocean would be pressing against their walls. Then the waterline dropped below Oksana's floor, and sunlight reached her apartment without passing through a kilometer of sea. For several minutes, Nereid existed in two worlds at once, upper districts in air, lower districts still moving beneath blue water. The change happened every 11 years, when Pelagos, its companion moons, and the gas giant aligned into a rare tidal minimum. The alignment was predictable to the second, and every district had been prepared for it. Residents called it deep low. The city called the fully exposed interval 51 minutes. When the last water cleared the central streets, exterior pressure gates opened for the first time since the previous cycle. Oksana stepped outside onto pavement that was usually a submerged transit deck. It was wet, bright, and unexpectedly warm. She had expected the sky to feel empty. Instead, the giant planet above made the air feel crowded with scale. The first natural wind reached the basin from the western rim. Oksana stopped walking when it touched her face. Air moved differently from water. It caught loose hair, silk, dust, and sound without pushing the whole body with it. Around her, adult residents opened structures that spent 11 years folded into the walls. None of them treated the opening like an emergency. It was ordinary civic choreography. Balconies extended, dry stairways unfolded, temporary bridges locked into place where underwater traffic normally passed. The city was not becoming a surface city. It was revealing a second version of itself that existed for less than an hour. Buoyant plazas that normally floated against guide rails settled onto hidden supports as the last water drained away. Transit pods designed to swim between towers lowered onto narrow dry guideways and switched to wheeled crawl mode. Nereid's architecture had been built around two different kinds of weight in water and weight without it. Nothing about deep low was improvised. Every hinge, stair, rail, and public square had waited 11 years for this morning. And then the city began using the one resource it almost never had, open air. Nereid had designed culture around that scarcity just as carefully as it designed pressure walls. From sealed bays near the upper towers, enormous sheets of transparent fabric rose into the wind. They were called sky sails, structures too light and too broad to survive ordinary life underwater. Within minutes, hundreds of them stretched between towers, bending sunlight into moving bands of silver, turquoise, and gold. Oksana crossed a bridge beneath them while the gas giant burned orange beyond the city rim. The same buildings that looked dark and blue underwater now reflected hard white sunlight from every wet surface. For 51 minutes, Nereid's color palette belonged to another planet. The central interchange became a plaza. Docking rails became benches. Former water lanes became open corridors full of adults looking upward. No one had come outside to prove the city could survive. Survival here had been solved generations ago. They came because deep low offered sensations that their architecture could not manufacture convincingly. Real wind had no speaker. Real sunlight did not arrive through water filters. The open sky had no ceiling hidden behind it. At minute 34, the city began a custom known simply as one breath. It was the only scheduled minute when Nereid deliberately tried to sound uninhabited. Mechanical systems dropped to their quietest safe level. Transit stopped. Public spaces went still for 60 seconds. Oksana heard wind crossing 300 towers, water falling from ledges, and fabric pulling gently against distant cables. For someone raised on Earth, the sound was ordinary. In Nereid, adults waited 11 years to hear it once. Oksana closed her eyes, not because the view disappointed her, but because the city had suddenly become louder with almost nothing running. When the minute ended, machinery returned softly. The sky had already changed color. The gas giant had moved across the sun enough to turn the basin from silver blue to violet and amber. Long shadows crossed streets that had spent most of their existence without direct shadows at all. Sky sails shifted angle. Their transparent surfaces caught the new light and painted moving bands across entire tower faces. Deep Low was not a holiday added to Nereid. It was an alternate operating state designed into the civilization itself. No other hour in Nereid's calendar required the whole city to become physically different. At minute 43, the first return signal appeared at the far edge of the basin, a blue line where no water had been moments before. Nobody ran. The city had practiced this sequence for generations, and the sea was returning exactly when expected. Sky sails descended into sealed housings. Air bridges folded. Outdoor platforms retracted behind pressure doors. Oksana stayed outside until her district's final access call, watching the horizon become water again. The returning sea entered the deepest channels first, filling them like enormous blue veins through the city floor. Dry guideways disappeared. Transit pods lifted from their wheels and regained buoyancy as water rose around them. The central plaza became reflective, then shallow, then suddenly deep enough that its lower railings vanished. Oksana entered a transparent pressure corridor while water climbed the towers behind her. From inside, she watched public spaces close in the opposite order from the morning, air architecture folding back into water architecture. At minute 50, direct sunlight was already losing its hard edges. The rising sea filtered gold into green. The gas giant warped behind the new water line, its enormous bands bending through waves and thickening blue glass. Marine traffic restarted below. Exterior lights shifted toward wavelengths that carried cleanly through water. One by one, the lower towers disappeared from open air, not destroyed, just returned to the environment they had been built for. The sea reached the central spires. Sky sails were gone. Wind vanished from the streets because there were no streets in air anymore. Oksana rode upward through the residential tower while the city outside became darker, bluer, and quieter in a completely different way. When she reached her floor, the waterline was only a few meters below the window where the morning had begun. She stood in the same place and watched it rise across the glass. For a moment, half the window showed open sky and half showed ocean. Then the division climbed past her eyes. Sunlight softened. Sound changed. The room once again looked out into deep blue water instead of air. A large filter-feeding animal passed between the towers, returning to a route that had been empty for less than an hour. Nereid's exterior transit resumed. Floating signs and guide lights reappeared where pedestrians had stood minutes earlier. By the time the last tower vanished beneath the surface, the city looked almost exactly as it had the night before. The transformation left no monument on the skyline. Its evidence remained in wet surfaces, stored sky sails, and the people who had felt the wind. Within minutes, pedestrian space had become navigation space again. Oksana had spent 4 years learning how normal an underwater city could become. It took 51 minutes of open air to show her how strange normal had become. Outside her window, the gas giant faded into a distorted orange glow above layers of water. The next deep low would not arrive until Oksana was 36. The sky lasted 51 minutes. Nereid would wait 11 years for the next one.